Hello and welcome to our third edition of the CC Orchestra Show. I am so glad that you're joining me today. We are going to be talking about a fantastic romantic composer named Antonin Dvorak. Say that with me. Antonin Dvorak. Dvorak lived between 1841 and 1904, and we just heard a little bit of his New World Symphony. Dvorak lived and worked in the country that we know as the Czech Republic. He is described as Bohemian. That's his culture, and that area was known as Bohemia. Dvorak was a really interesting composer who was known for melodies, much like Brahms. And Dvorak was also known for turning folk tunes from his area and places that he visited and turning them into music. We called that descriptive composition. So that means that his music actually describes people, places, and settings. We talked a little bit about that last week, but Dvorak really took this idea and developed it in his compositions. He was one of the first composers to become famous all around the world. The composers that we've talked about so far in the classical and romantic periods did become famous, but it was more in their region of the world, in Europe. And Antonin Dvorak spent some time in the United States, and he traveled about, and perhaps that was one of the reasons that he became so widely known. He started playing violin at age 6. Some of you are 6-year-old violinists, I think. So that is a cool fact about Dvorak. He played other instruments as well, and I think you'll hear more about that in our Classics for Kids episode later. But I want to tell you a story about how Dvorak really started getting going as a composer. So during his time, there were contests for emerging composers where they could write a piece of music and submit it, and if they won the contest, that would kind of jumpstart their career. So I guess Antonin Dvorak decided, hey, I'm going to try to make a living as a composer, and I'm going to submit my symphony into this contest and hope that it wins. So he worked long and hard on his first symphony and submitted it into the contest, and he didn't win. In fact, not only did he win, they actually lost his manuscript, which, if you can imagine, writing a long symphony that you'd worked such a long time on, and they lost it, it could really be devastating. Dvorak at this point could have called it quits and said, that's it, I'm done with composing, forget it, but he didn't. He persevered, and that is an attribute of Dvorak that I'd like for you to remember and try to think about in your own life when things don't go as planned. So Dvorak persevered, and he kept submitting his pieces into these contests. And eventually, one of the judges in the contest was named Johannes Brahms. You probably know a lot about him. Hopefully you've been listening to Brahms' music all week long. So Brahms was the judge that said, hey, I think that this composer's music is important, and Dvorak won his first contest. And not only that, but Brahms mentored him in a way and came alongside him, and he and some of his colleagues showed Dvorak how he would go about getting his music published and how he could just make further strides as a composer. So it's neat to see the link between Brahms and Dvorak. So Dvorak wrote a lot of music. So he wrote symphonies, and we talked about the symphony last week. He also wrote operas, choral works, concertos, pieces for individual instruments, chamber music, and songs and much, much more. Chances are, if you have been playing a musical instrument for a few years, you've probably played something by Dvorak. Like Brahms, he was really known for memorable melodies, and often when you're beginning to play an instrument, some of these melodies might be arranged for you. My violin students are actually playing a piece or learning a piece right now that Dvorak wrote from his New World Symphony, and I'm going to play that for you later. But first, I want to talk about the time when Dvorak lived and worked in the United States. And his music that he wrote during his time in the United States, it was between 1892 and 1895, this music was the most famous music that he ever wrote. So, and the neat thing about it is that the music that he wrote describes the place where he was writing, the people, the culture. And so I hope that you'll listen to these works. He wrote the Symphony from the New World. The New World was referring to the United States, which is also known more casually as the New World Symphony. He wrote the Cello Concerto and the American String Quartet. He wrote more than that, but those are the most famous things that he wrote during his period in the United States. And these are the ones that I really want you to focus on listening after you've listened to the listening for today. And as you're listening to the New World Symphony, the Cello Concerto, and American String Quartet, I want you just to think about what you hear in the music and how it might have described the American culture in the late 1800s. And if you hear parts of the music that sounds like maybe he's describing people or places or the way Americans are, or were, I should say. But that was a really cool thing. And during the Romantic period, as you know, music was more about the way that we feel. And a lot of composers were doing just what Dvorak was, writing music that portrayed a specific place or culture or a setting. So yes, this is a new and exciting thing about the Romantic period. So he didn't end up staying in the United States. It's because he got homesick. He longed for his native Bohemia, and he moved back home in 1895. And he lived there until he died in 1904. Now, I would like for you right now to take a break and listen to a Classics for Kids episode. I'm going to hold this up. So go to classicsforkids.com and choose the episode that is called About Antonin Dvorak. Once you have listened to this episode, tune back in for part 2. Thank you.